Okay, good evening. So I'm gonna I've taken a while to write my latest work. Um, yeah, sorry. Okay, let me just get this out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to let's see. I want to get it as good an angle as possible here. Um, so all right, so this is going to be a series on the Odyssey, but I'm going to keep them relatively short, individually speaking. So, see, let's make sure I'm properly. See, yeah, I'm going to try and angle this to where I'm looking at camera for the most part. So, spoiler warning for the Odyssey, both film and book. I will not stop to warn you otherwise. I'm just going to go with whatever comes to mind. Let's ask a simple question. What the actual hell does book accurate even mean? Is the Odyssey history? The simple answer to that is no. It is not the chronicle of some historian in the court of Odysseus, Agamemnon, Menelaus, or any other king for that matter. It isn't even, in fact, first related in written form. It is, in fact, spoken word before it is anything else. So, oral history? There is a such thing, and it can be surprisingly accurate, though fuzzy in the details. Unfortunately, no. The Odyssey was composed centuries after the fact, likely based on the legends and songs told by people in the meantime. It is, in fact, a work of poetry, a literal epic. Yes, there are elements that can be traced back to ancient history. Troy, in fact, did exist. But if we're imagining Homer sitting down with scrolls doing his research, and besides the fact he was supposedly blind, we're badly misreading the point of what he was doing. The Trojan War at this point was long concluded, the deeds of its warriors long since rolled up into songs meant to inspire, meant to entertain around the fire, meant to support a warrior culture where glory and eternal fame were idealized. Homer, or whoever was truly behind the epic, was an entertainer first, a documentarian last. I mean, just look at all the different exotic places, strange people, hissable villains, terrible monsters, heroic challenges included in the tale. The tale wasn't valued and beloved because it was full of documentary fact. It was valued and beloved because it was a ripping good yarn. The fact that Odysseus is purposefully given the role of a consummate bullshit artist is a feature, not a bug. Nobody was going to preserve a story about an easier return home to an expectedly warm homecoming. Odysseus' resounding success of an eventual but belated return would stand the test of time, and so would Agamemnon's rather quick but ultimately tragic return to Mycenae, which would itself spawn its own share of literature. Stories don't get told and retold because they're true or documentary fact. They get told and retold because they're interesting and meaningful. We can be sure that the Odyssey, even in its original form, was made and remade in this way. Without documentary evidence, one way or the other, who can be certain that there even was an Odysseus? That the name isn't simply some meaningful pseudonym or epithet applied to some other fellow who had a complicated journey home, one whose original meaning escapes us now. One way or another, the absolute literal connection to the truth of what happened at the end of the Bronze Age after the Trojan War has been worn through like a root on a path trampled into splinters over the years. What we have now is the text, which was set down centuries before the foundation of the Roman Empire. We have it in what is now called Homeric Greek, which was to the language of its time, which Shakespeare might have been to us. We also, though, have translations of the standardized original text for our language today, a language that came into existence thousands of years after the authorship of the Iliad and Odyssey. The language as Homer spoke it was dead thousands of years before even Old English was spoken. Where is the pure version of this story supposed to come from that is worthy to be treated so sacrosanct? The truth is, it exists nowhere. Moreover, it doesn't need it. There's no limit on the Odyssey's distribution. Not even the copyright modern works like recently published books, comics, and recently made films have. You can download a text copy off the internet or out of some library, the original Greek, and do your own translation. There are quite a few public domain translations of the Odyssey, in addition to copyrighted translations of a more recent vintage. So, barring some absolutely terrible calamity, some all-consuming dark ages, you're unlikely to see the original Odyssey disappear. It will survive all the new versions, just like it survived all the old new versions, all the rip-offs, parodies, flowery translations, children's versions, etc. I mean, if creating an adaptation doesn't adhere 100% of the text means the end of Western civilization, then it must have ended over 2,000 years ago. The interpretation and reinterpretation of the classics is nothing new. What's more, we should really consider that even now we write and rewrite our own history into fiction, and that people in the past have done the same. This is fiction for basically for all intents and purposes. As long as we acknowledge that, understand that, then really what is the actual issue? If you love the original Odyssey or its translations, turn around. If you have any real stake in this argument, you should see a copy on your bookshelf. That copy will remain exactly like it is, even after the next filmmaker makes their version of the Odyssey on the screen. Whether we're talking another film epic or some new series or miniseries. After all, it will remain unchanged. It remained unchanged when Nolan made this film. If you prefer it, more power to you. You do you. I prefer the original version of the novel The Relic to the film made in the 90s. I prefer the original Cowboy Bebop to the version Netflix made in live action. The existence of one doesn't cancel the other one out. It can't really. There's an interview that James M. Cain, author of The Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity, gave to the New York Times book review back in 1969 concerning Hollywood's adaptations of his works. The quote is: "People tell me, you don't care what's done to your book." I tell them, they haven't done anything to my book. It's right there on the shelf. They paid me, and that's the end of it. The book remains on the shelf. Something else has been added. Something, sometimes when a good adaptation is made, it can eclipse the original work. But I have my doubts that Nolan's Odyssey will eclipse what's on your shelf, much less replace it. The thing is, fiction is fiction. One is not more true than the other. We can argue that one has greater quality than the other, but to argue accuracy is to argue fact. You can't argue fact with a fiction. You can be faithful to a fiction, but not accurate to it. It's important, I think, to think of things in this way because there is really no good in acting like there is some sort of objective truth there. Fiction is made up. In some cases, pieces of the real world are brought into the story, but while such facts might be accurate in the context of fiction, the overall body of material is not factual in nature. Now, you can talk about it in terms of a fact is provable, but then the best you'll be able to say in many cases is that your recreation, your fictionalization is based on something provable. That will be something we address in the next story, the next um, segment, as I explain why we have to be very careful when talking about such accuracy, as reality is often enfolded within fiction. And that's it for now. Let's see. So 10:44. Hopefully, this kind of monologue here will um, be easier for people to watch. I'm going to try and keep things a little bit more controlled. So, in the meantime, y'all have a good night and be good. See ya.